Our first guest tonight is the most powerful movie star in the world. Top Gun Maverick is nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture. Please welcome the one, the only Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise is the last man anyone expects to talk about Jesus. For nearly 4 decades, his name has been fused to a different faith entirely, one that made him the most famous Scientologist alive. So when his voice and the name of Jesus appeared together in the same breath, in front of cameras, it should not have worked. It should have felt like a contradiction nobody could explain. Instead, it set off one of the strangest chain reactions of his entire public life, and to understand why it landed so hard, you have to go back to the boy he was long before any of this began. Thomas Cruise Maypother IV was born on July 3, 1962, in Syracuse, New York, into a household that never stayed still. His father worked as an electrical engineer, but steady ground was something the family rarely found. By the time Cruise reached his teenage years, he had moved through more than a dozen schools, dropped into new towns again and again, always arriving as the unfamiliar kid trying to read a room he had never seen before. He later admitted he never had a single close friend growing up, because friendship needs time, and time was the one thing his childhood never gave him. Dyslexia made it worse. Diagnosed at age 7, he spent years struggling through a school system that had no patience for how his mind processed words. By the time he finished high school in 1980, he has said he was functionally illiterate, carrying a private shame that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with a world that judged him by a skill he could not yet access. His home life added its own weight. Cruise has described his father as a man capable of switching from calm to frightening in a heartbeat, the kind of presence that taught a child to stay alert at all times. In 1974, when Tom was 12, his mother made the decision to leave, taking him and his sisters back across the border into the United States. Cruise later spoke about that moment as one of the bravest things he ever witnessed, his mother choosing to protect her children even when it meant starting over with nothing. It was in the years right after that separation, while everything around him still felt unsettled, that young Tom found something unexpected: the Catholic Church. In the fall of 1976, at 14 years old, Cruise enrolled at St. Francis Seminary in Cincinnati, Ohio, encouraged by a priest named Father Rick Schneider who saw something serious in him. He was not just going through the motions. According to his close friend at the time, Shane Dempler, Cruise had a genuine pull toward faith. They attended daily mass together, spent time in the chapel, and talked seriously about what it might mean to become priests themselves. For a boy who had spent years feeling rootless, the seminary offered something his life had never had: order, ritual, a sense of belonging to something larger than his own chaos. It did not last. Cruise and Dempler took liquor from the private quarters reserved for the Franciscan brothers and slipped into the woods to drink it with other students. Word got back to the seminary, and rather than a dramatic expulsion, the school quietly wrote to his parents suggesting he not return the following year. Within a single school year, the boy who had seriously considered the priesthood walked away from organized religion entirely, just as his mother's relocation pulled him toward a new school and, soon after, toward acting. That early flirtation with Catholic faith would have stayed a forgotten footnote if not for what came roughly a decade later. In 1986, the year Top Gun made him a global star, Cruise met Mimi Rogers at a dinner party. Rogers had grown up immersed in the Church of Scientology. Her father had been a mission holder with personal ties to the organization's founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Through his relationship and eventual marriage to Rogers, Cruise was introduced to the church's teachings, and for a man still privately carrying the wound of his childhood dyslexia, Scientology's promise of a method that could finally make learning click landed with enormous emotional force. Cruise has said it plainly: people had tried to teach him before, but nobody had taught him how to learn until he encountered Scientology's study technology. From that point forward, his public identity reshaped itself almost entirely around this new belief system. The seminary years, the daily mass, the conversations about priesthood, all of it receded into a past he rarely, if ever, brought up again. For most of the next 2 decades, Cruise's religious identity was Scientology and nothing else, defended loudly and without hesitation. In 1992, he confirmed his involvement publicly in an interview with Barbara Walters after tabloids had already leaked the connection 2 years earlier. By the mid-2000s, he had become the church's most visible face on the planet, willing to clash with journalists and hosts who questioned it. The most famous of those clashes came in the summer of 2005, when actress Brooke Shields spoke publicly about using medication to manage postpartum depression. Cruz, appearing on the Today Show opposite Matt Lauer, dismissed psychiatry outright and insisted there was no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain, a claim that drew swift and furious pushback from medical professionals and mental health advocates across the country. He later admitted, in a far calmer interview with the same host, that he regretted how the exchange had come across, that looking back at himself he thought he sounded arrogant rather than convinced. By his own description, it was not the message he meant to send, even if the substance of his Scientology-aligned views never actually changed. Then in January 2008, a piece of footage surfaced that pulled his religious identity into an entirely different kind of spotlight. A 9-minute video, recorded years earlier for an internal Scientology event, leaked onto the internet and spread within days. In it, Cruz stood in a black turtleneck, an ID badge on his chest, speaking with total conviction about Scientologists being uniquely equipped to help people after car crashes and disasters, the only ones who truly understood the mind. The Church of Scientology tried to suppress the clip through legal pressure, which only multiplied the number of copies circulating online. For audiences who had only known Cruz as the easygoing movie star from Risky Business and Jerry Maguire, the video was unsettling in its intensity, and it cemented an image of him that would follow him for years. Not just an actor who happened to be religious, but a man whose religion seemed to define nearly everything about how the public saw him. It is against that backdrop, decades of total identification with one faith and very public hostility toward questioning it, that the idea of Tom Cruise saying the name of Jesus on television became something people online could not stop talking about. The real seed of the story traces back to October 2016, at the London premiere of Jack Reacher, Never Go Back. A Christian evangelist named Dylan Novak, known for approaching celebrities with small gifts and gospel messages, managed to get close enough to hand Cruz a bag containing Christian literature. By Novak's own account, Cruz accepted it warmly, thanked him, and kept the bag with him as he continued into the screening. It was a brief, polite, entirely private exchange between two strangers on a red carpet, nothing more dramatic than that. There was no confrontation, no declaration, no moment of public reckoning with faith. Novak has been open about how difficult it is to even attempt sharing his message with a Scientologist as prominent as Cruz, given how tightly managed the actor's public interactions tend to be. But the story of that gift bag, small and ordinary as it was, gave the internet exactly the kind of seed it loves to grow. Nearly a decade later, in 2025, that seed bloomed into something far larger and far less accurate. A wave of videos began circulating online suggesting that Cruz had been confronted live on television about Jesus by Jonathan Roumie, the actor known for playing Christ in the series The Chosen. The thumbnails promised an explosive face-off. The narration was urgent and dramatic, cutting between dramatic music and stills of both men. It had every visual signal of a real viral moment. The problem is that no verified broadcast of any such confrontation exists anywhere. It never aired. It never happened in the way the videos claimed. What actually happened was something quieter and, in its own way, more interesting. A culture primed for years by Cruz's total devotion to one controversial faith was simply hungry for a story where that devotion finally got challenged in public, by someone who had literally played the very figure Cruz's seminary years once pointed him toward. People wanted to believe it because the contrast felt too perfect to be coincidence. A man who almost became a Catholic priest at 14, finally being asked to answer for the path he chose instead. What happened next, the part nobody saw coming, was not a confrontation at all. It was Cruz's complete and unwavering silence on the matter, paired with an even louder public reaffirmation of where his loyalty actually lives. In October 2016, around the same period as the Novak encounter, Cruz gave an interview at another premiere in which he stated outright that he had been a Scientologist for more than 30 years, calling it a beautiful religion and saying he felt incredibly proud to belong to it. There was no hedge in his voice, no defensiveness, nothing that suggested a man wrestling privately with old Catholic convictions. And in March 2026, reporting placed him in the front row at Scientology's annual gathering honoring L. Ron Hubbard's birthday in Clearwater, Florida, seated among the organization's most prominent members in a show of visible, unembarrassed support for its current leadership. The online arguments about Jesus and Cruz were still circulating widely at that exact moment, and his answer, if you can call it that, was simply to show up exactly where the church needed him to be seen. That is the real twist in this story, stranger in some ways than any invented television showdown could have been. The boy who once knelt in daily mass at a Cincinnati seminary, who seriously imagined a life spent serving the Catholic Church, grew into a man who built his entire adult identity around a faith that stands in direct opposition to that childhood path, and he has never once shown public regret about the trade. The seminary chapter gets brought up constantly online precisely because it creates such a vivid before and after, but Cruz himself almost never references it. He does not frame his life as a story of leaving Jesus behind for something else. In every interview where the subject comes up, he speaks only of Scientology, only of what it gave him when nothing else could, the ability to read, to learn, to feel in control of a mind that had spent his entire childhood working against him. Maybe that is the part of his story most people miss when they go looking for a dramatic clash that never aired. Cruz's relationship to faith was never really a contest between two religions fighting for his soul on camera. It was a much earlier, much more private negotiation, made by a frightened, dyslexic, constantly uprooted kid who found two very different doors offering him the same thing: structure, belonging, and a reason to believe his life was headed somewhere on purpose. He walked through the Catholic door first and it closed behind him almost by accident. He walked through the Scientology door a decade later and never looked back. The internet can keep inventing the confrontation it wishes had happened, the dramatic standoff between the man and the faith he left behind. But the real story, the one with no script and no edited thumbnail, is quieter and a great deal more telling. Tom Cruise made his choice decades ago, and every public appearance since has simply been him standing by it, in front of cameras, without flinching, exactly the way he always has.